What is clickbait criticism? The answer might shock you. Hi everyone, thank you for coming. Thanks to MIFF for having us. This is part of the Talking Pictures program, which I encourage you to indulge in. There are another 12 events happening, is that right, Al? And today we are live streaming from the Wheeler Centre here. Hi to everyone on the internet. We know that you have other tabs open. If any of you are tweeting as well as watching, the hashtag is MIFF 2015 TP. And also welcome to everyone here who's on the Critics Campus for MIFF, and if anyone wants to watch what those guys are doing, check the Critics Campus hashtag as well. I hope I've remembered everything. This is very exciting. Without further ado, we're going to introduce ourselves today. This is a panel that I find a little bit intimidating, but hopefully won't by the end of this discussion, from a range of critical disciplines and I guess different areas of film appreciation. I'm going to ask them to sort of introduce themselves, I think. We have to my left Dana Linsson, and I'll tell you is the founder of the Slow Criticism Project and the editor of De Film Krant.
Wow.
Is that how I say it, Dana?
You pronounce it even better than I would do.
Thank you. Could I ask you to introduce yourself? And I realise it's a bit ironic to ask you to give yourself a potted introduction.
I like actually very much that you started by mentioning the Slow Criticism Project, because besides being a critic for a daily newspaper and the editor-in-chief of a film magazine, a teacher, doing radio, doing all that, introductions, blah, blah, making the rounds. Actually, the Slow Criticism Project is, even though it's probably an event that happens once a year, and it's being called a project because it's very loose and we don't exactly know what it is. It could be a dossier, it could be a special edition of the magazine, it could be a conference just like this. We even organized a critics retreat once, where one whole week we had critics in an old farmhouse in Belgium talking and writing and having endless breakfasts, and wow. I mean, I was always so envious of writers and artists having their retreats, so I thought maybe critics should be entitled to have one. Anyways, so slow criticism being all that, kind of the antidote against everything that's speeding up journalism, such as clickbait. So here I am. I'm sort of the green to the red of the day.
Got it. Okay. I'll come back to that. There was a
Please
lot there.
do.
Thank you. Next to Dana, we have Mel Campbell, who is a Melbourne-based freelance journalist. To cast my summary over Mel's career, she is at the coalface of writing. I feel that's how I picture her every day, sitting at the coalface, making her living from writing. Mel, is that how you describe your day-to-day life? How do you describe your career?
Every morning I get up and I put on a special internet writing miner's helmet and I put on my special suit and I go into the mines, the content mines. Basically, I'm a freelance journalist and critic. I sit at home in front of my computer pretty much all the time, except when I'm at film screenings. And the challenge for me is how to pitch my particular skill set, which is kind of half academic, half journalism, to an industry that kind of wants a very specific idea of film writing. A lot of the time, there's a consumer-led film writing, which is all about, should you pay your money? And considering how expensive movie tickets are getting, maybe that's a good thing. But also it's quite a news cycle and a celebrity cycle-led way of writing about film, whereas I'm very interested in analysing things. I like analysing the movies thematically, and basically everything to do with them in terms of cultural artefacts, and not just as this is a new movie, what do I think of that as a critic. And I also strongly reject the trend to memoir that has often started to come into writing online particularly. So within that, I struggle to make a living.
Thank you, Mel.
No worries.
Okay, we'll get deeper into that. Next to Mel's left is Kevin B. Lee, visiting us from New York. I will give him a potted summary by reciting his Vimeo bio.
Okay.
King of the video essays, New York Times. One of the brightest film critics working today, Roger Ebert. Why doesn't he get a real job? Mum. So, could you describe to us what you do, Kevin, and also tell us how your mum would describe it?
Right. Well, my mom would be like, yeah, he got his video essays featured in the New York Times, but did they say anything bad about them? That's just, I'll never be able to live up to her standards. But anyway, I've got bigger fish to fry, like how to make a living, period. So with these video essays, yeah, it's a form that I helped kind of develop over the last several years, where film criticism now takes the form of videos. And you can watch a 5 or 10 minute video online that will kind of illuminate or explore some aspect of movies. And I guess it's sort of like the evolution of film criticism itself, where it's branched out into all the different ways of experiencing the internet. You're no longer reading content, you're watching content or listening to content. So it's great. It takes even more work to do than to write a text article, and the sort of, I guess, the compensation for doing it is not really to scale. And then there's also the pressure of how to make this super viral. Of course, it's like, video clickbait is its own thing as well. You can never escape that hook. And so myself, it's just sort of gotten to the point where I kind of sort of halfway through in the towel. I have one foot in criticism, but I'm also pursuing a teaching career just so I don't have to worry about clickbait all the time. So it's a matter of trying to manage a way that I can keep pursuing the things that I enjoy about cinema and to write it and think about it, but without being beholden to these really, like disheartening, dehumanizing methods of, disseminating or sharing our love for film with others.
Some strong words there.
Dehumanizing?
I loved it. Thank you, Kevin. And to Kevin's left, we have Sinead Stubbins, who I always see described as a pop culture writer, sometimes a pop culture critic. Sinead, I'd like you to explain to us what you do, but also how you understand this term that's used all the time. Because what is a pop culture writer?
I don't know. I didn't give myself that name.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. Well, I guess I write about pop culture a lot. I write about, pop music, popular TV, popular films. I'm certainly not a film academic, but I write about the things I like and the things my friends like for websites like Junkie and Vice and The Guardian and publications that have maybe a more generalist, populist tone.
Okay.
Yeah.
You do
really know what
recaps as well?
I do TV recaps. True Detective, which has been...
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. It's been a slog, but one more week, so it's looking up.
Thank you, Sinead. So, what an interesting panel of people, and we don't have very long. What we're going to try and do...
Hang on, who are you?
Oh my God, who am I? That is such a good point.
It's a deep question.
Thank you for asking. My name's Penny. Thank you. I'm Penny Modra, and I am, I would say these days, much more a reader than a writer. I have had a history of editing commercial titles on the internet, so I feel I have lived at that coalface and also in the sandwich between finance and writers. And I'm fascinated by the tensions. And if you want to find out what I'm doing now, I'm at The Good Copy, so please come and visit us. Thank you, Mel. Today we're going to try and talk about clickbait criticism, and in a way we've kind of summarised the debate in the title. We're going to try and talk about what is criticism, what is going on the internet, and all of this in 40 minutes. We will save, obviously, some time because we'd love you guys to be able to ask your questions at the end, so please try to save your thoughts till we throw to you guys. In approaching this, let's just try to dive in with the question, and I hope we won't agree on this. What do you think of as good criticism? And this is going to be, I presume, kind of a personal response. Mel, you're nodding. Do you want to try and answer this first?
Well, I thought a lot about the nature of film criticism a few weeks ago when the website The Dissolve dissolved, yeah. Because there was such an outpouring among a lot of my film people of grief that this was one of the last outposts of good criticism, and now we're just left with all the rubbish behind, which is not entirely true, because The Dissolve was a very specific and very intellectual website that probably won't appeal to everyone, but good criticism remains. I mean, I would argue that good criticism is something that engages with the text on its own terms, that thinks, what was this film trying to do? Has it been successful? Where does it sit in relation to other things? That doesn't judge it within a vacuum, but rather tries to see it in terms of genre or in terms of what its creative personnel have done in the past. Does it represent something different or something continuous for them?
Okay.
And also, I think that you should take note of your own visceral reactions to something, but not make the entire review about you.
Okay.
I think that's like acknowledging that film is meant to move you, but trying to still retain some kind of analytical quality. That's what I think good criticism is.
Do you feel like that's something that's agreed upon?
Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, what do you guys reckon?
I think actually basically all critics agree on that, and then they sort of give their own nuance and detail to that, also depending a bit on the outlet they're writing for. I would like to add something probably a bit more polemical. You have these kind of trends and tendencies in film criticism. In some areas it's more socially engaged, and in others it's more just concerned about the aesthetics. I think right now is the moment in time where film criticism should also be some form of cultural and societal criticism. So it should be definitely be just a bit more than being concerned with the text, but we should be concerned with the world as a whole through cinema being the cinematic or the post-cinematic, but being like the whole mediated world as we're getting it through moving images.
Diana, can I ask you something related to that? I suppose for people who haven't heard of your project until today, you could be just Slow Criticism project could be seen as kind of a sort of an activist project.
It is.
Could you talk about why and how you started it?
We started it actually as a reaction on all the cut downs in criticism, and at the same time the so-called or much lamented crisis in film criticism. And I felt that at that time, I was probably writing for 10 years then, like, why should I spend the rest of my life working in a profession that's dying and decaying, and also feel very sort of self-loathing and full of self-pity, doing something that I actually really enjoy, and when talking to people, they enjoy cinema. So couldn't we just turn it around and think of another way, and maybe kind of a countercultural way to claim criticism back at that point in time? And that was actually sort of before the real cut downs in criticism and things we've been seeing the last 5 years. So what we did, it involves many things. It involves long reads, stuff that was not as much around on the internet, except probably for Senses of Cinema, at that time as it is now. I think people are reclaiming the long form, but we also try to sort of go back to the traditions of writing games, so make it more playful, reinvent the rules, and maybe that's not also revolutionary or groundbreaking, but just the act of liberate yourself of all these constraints, that was actually really helpful. So during this retreat, when we were all trying to sum it up a bit and trying to make some conclusions, we felt like probably slow criticism is more of a mentality. It's an approach to criticism that involves joy as much as cultural criticism, as social awareness, and it's something that keeps you going through the day as well. I mean, it's even if you have to go, I mean, critics complain a lot, like, oh, I have to go and write about the zillionth genre film or the zillionth romantic comedy, and then actually when you feel like, yeah, but I'm going there for a reason, I'm here on a mission, and that just makes you feel better.
Yeah.
And actually I think that's meaningful
And positive too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay. It's very. We have to come back to this idea of all these constraints and what they are. But first, I want to ask Kevin, how do you think about what is good criticism?
I mean, I think I agree with a lot of what's already been said. I mean, I think we all have a pretty good idea of what good criticism is. The reason why you're in this room is because you care about criticism. You probably have an idea. I think the underlying sort of motivation for us coming here is, well, if we all know what good criticism is, like, why are we not seeing it as much as we'd like to? Or, what's the problem? Why is it that a website like The Dissolve, why is it unable to maintain or exist? And a lot of that, I know those guys. I live in the same city as them. I've worked with them. They're all really great people who've been writing about film for many years now. First with the Onion AV Club, and then when the Onion AV Club no longer required their services, they were moved to the Pitchfork company hired them to start this wonderful website called The Dissolve, offering them full benefits package, really nice salary, that word that these days you barely associate with a professional film critic, and they're all family people. I mean, I don't know how many film critics these days actually are married with children, because it's not really a type of lifestyle that can afford such luxuries. But they were able to pull it off, at least for a couple of years. But what happened was it really comes down to economics. The website could not afford to pay them the standard of compensation that they deserved and were getting, because the click-through rates just weren't high enough, and it wasn't converting enough ad revenue and blah, 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 all this stuff that probably just is very boring to hear about, but is actually what matters when it comes to justifying the operations of a for-profit website. And I can speak to this for myself. Here's where I love telling stories. I think telling stories really is where it comes down to concrete examples of these things really happening and playing out in people's lives. And speaking for myself, I can share the one experience I had as a full-time salaried film critic, which lasted a year. It was working for the website Fandor, which I still work for now as a freelance video essayist. But I was hired to basically build their editorial presence from the ground up. I hired as many talented film writers as I could to write about movies on the site. If you're not familiar with Fandor, it's basically a kind of art house version of Netflix. It's a subscription online service that where you can watch independent and international films. And so the challenge was to make people care about films that they didn't necessarily know about. A very similar challenge that this festival has. I mean, I don't know how many filmmakers you've heard of that are in this festival prior to coming here, but the festival does a great job working with film critics to really get a broader and deeper sense of awareness and appreciation for what's available, and really drumming up enthusiasm. And so I had a similar type of challenge to kind of build that enthusiasm. I hired really smart film critics, maybe too smart, because what happened was they would write these really wonderful appreciations, but then they're not sexy enough. They just don't have that sense of here's why you should care about Pedro Costa, kind of thing like that. And the thing is they wanted, most people want to hear about filmmakers they already know about. The Spielbergs, the Tarantinos, the Wes Andersons, and the celebrities as well. These are filmmakers that were not present on the website, so I didn't feel like it was within my domain to write about them. And then on top of that, I was also tasked with this newfangled method of getting clicks called search engine optimization, or SEO. Although my interpretation of that of those three letters is like soul eroding operations, because I literally, as an editor, I spent half of my day just coming up with keywords and just formatting these articles, and including my own. And so these days, when you write an article, and I don't know if it's true for you when you have your own website, half the time you're actually writing the article, but then the rest of the time it's all about formatting. It's about adding images and the top image that looks great on your phone when you pull it up, all the keywords that will actually get it in front of people when they do the Google searches. This isn't what I signed up for when I wanted to be a film critic. This is like computer programming.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Does Fandor make money?
It does.
Yeah.
How much I won't say. I can't say, but.
But it has somehow found a model that's more successful.
Well, it's a startup. And so a lot of what I'm describing is a startup mentality. Pitchfork is a startup, and a lot of this is just like startup corporate culture emanating from Silicon Valley. Just all the amazing tools and techniques to sort of make things more efficient and cost effective. But when you kind of when you apply that algorithm, that sort of like corporate logic, onto something that is essentially cultural, and turn it into a profit driving machine, it just doesn't add up. Of course it's not going to work. I mean, this is not stuff that, so like in my case, not only was I making video essays, but I was held to a metric where they could track how much traffic my videos were bringing to the site. But even that wasn't enough. I mean, I can bring 100,000 people to the site with something I was doing, but what really mattered were how many people were subscribing to the service. That was the goal. That was the ultimate goal.
In marketing terms, conversions.
Conversions, yes. It's very evangelical. It's very religious. So that's like saying to the film critic of the age, we are going to evaluate your job performance not based on the quality of your writing. I mean, we know you're a smart writer. We know you're a good critic. We love great criticism. Yeah. But what really matters is how many people are going to subscribe to the Age based on your reviews. We're going to see people going to your review and then clicking to somehow through some weird set of links to the subscribe button. I mean, could you imagine Roger Ebert being held to that kind of thing? I mean, actually, he would be the one person to actually pull it off.
Actually, he could, because he's so flexible. He does cooking as well as film.
Right, but not even. Yeah. I don't think even A.O. Scott or Manola Jarvis at the New York Times could fulfill that sort of task.
Yeah.
And so I was really, I felt I was really put in a hard place, and it got to the point where it was like, I can make video essays about Jean-Luc Godard but people are. It's not going to be enough. It's just not enough of a what do you call it? Of a popularity. So finally got to the point where it was like, if you really want me to accomplish this, I need to start working with popular filmmakers. So I made this video about Spielberg, the Spielberg face. I showed it at my masterclass the other night. What happened was, I spent a long time working on it. I posted it one morning in the office, and then shortly after posting it, my boss came in and said, "Hey, Kevin, can I take you to lunch?" We go to lunch. He's like, "Okay." So after we spent some time sort of evaluating the numbers, and I'm sorry to say, we just don't need your services anymore. It's just not justified. We're not getting subscriptions. So that was like the worst lunch ever.
At least you got lunch.
At least I got lunch, yeah. I think it was some fancy form of pasta. I came back from the worst lunch ever, and the office was abuzz with this strange sort of energy in the air. And it's like, what's going on? The traffic of our site, we've got 200,000 hits in the past 2 hours. What's going on?
Oh my God.
It was a Spielberg video. It was posted on New York Times, on Slate, on pretty much every website. it's the most popular video essay I've ever made, next to this other one called Anatomy of a Sex Scene. Go figure.
Good keyword there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like, that one took me like 2 hours to make. It's like,
Right.
you can put in all the effort you want into making, a great piece of video work, but if it doesn't, like, if I just have anatomy of, if I words like sex, how to,
Yeah.
20 ways, like,
I'm writing this
all
down.
that stuff. It's all about keywords.
Yeah.
Keywords matter more than the actual quality of the content. Anyway, getting back to my job crisis situation. So traffic was through the roof. Everyone was like ecstatic, except for this one person who was like, well, how many conversions are we getting? How many subscriptions are we getting from the Spielberg video? So, it's just like...
Yeah, can't win.
But my boss still was quite taken in. He was like, Kevin, why don't we go get coffee? So we go get coffee, and that's when he decided he would retain my services on a freelance basis, which is what the position I've held ever since then, just sort of making. But since that time, I've sort of like, screw this. I just don't really have a need for this sort of like clickbait. I don't know, it's a pitfall as far as professional critics are concerned. I just don't have the time for it. It's not what I'm in it for. Let other people worry about it. I still dabble in these sort of keywords, just almost as like an ironic smirk to myself. I'd be like, how to make a blah, 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 just, and
It works.
Yeah, the last video I made the other week, it's on this great film that takes place almost entirely in a car, and it had there are 83 shots in this car, so I called 83 ways to shoot a road movie.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, let's just see what happens. And it went viral, but then there were all these angry people who wrote to me, like, I thought this was about the 83 greatest road movies ever. Because that's what people get. They want lists, they want, they want how-tos, they want to be told. And I think that's maybe getting back to your question about what is great film criticism. It seems that what people want out of great film criticism these days is just to be told what to think and what to believe, and
Interesting.
Which is very old-fashioned.
Actually, it's true. Yeah. As someone who was obsessed with the 1,000 greatest films of all time and was pursuing to-do lists or a top 10 list for many years, it is definitely like a way of people to educate themselves and to familiarize themselves. But now it's the point where I don't know. That needs to be put in perspective.
That's so interesting to see. So the crisis in film criticism started because we didn't need any authority anymore. And then came the listicle. So we're taking authority from other people telling us the 5 ways to do this, the 7 ways to get rid of that. And then basically we are sort of getting authority through lists.
But it's also about taste wars, because one of the clickbait strategies that never fails to work on me is 10 films that only stupid people think are smart, or 10 things that you're totally wrong about.
Right.
And I'm like, I'll show
think
you who's wrong. It's like, click, and the article turns into just a flaunting of taste. It's like a duel between the writer and the audience. I'll show you how I'm right, and then the commenters starting, oh, you obviously don't know anything. And but of course that's the environment that works these days, because it creates engagement. The idea of having fights in the comments section. Comments are terrible, right? But that's what gets people looking at your articles, really, is these contentious ideas and the battleground of taste, because it's so subjective, and because no one is ever truly right. It's just how much you can defend your opinion, really. But the idea of the canon still prevails, and so the idea of trying to challenge that has become incorporated into clickbait, and so has politics. You were saying that we need to be more broadly, socially critical, as well as of the texts themselves. But now we've got the problematic police, who basically write, such and such a film is really misogynist, or 10 ways that so-and-so left out people of colour. That politics has become just another thing to argue about, rather than...
It's a cliche.
And it feels really disingenuous a lot of the time, like it's only being done to whip up outrage among the audience, not so much because you really do care about these issues.
Can I ask, I tend to think time seems to go really time seems to go is it going fast for us or slow? The truth is, in my view, we are in the Wild West. Like, the internet is a frontier that we haven't even begun to... You know, all of us sit here and we're like, oh, the internet, yeah, right.
Yeah,
this has been happening
and
for,
people
I
behave
know all
like
about
Just
it.
for the record,
Yeah.
I love the internet.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting to, Sinead,
Like,
because
Mel,
I
thinks
feel...
Mel said that I was going to be the Pollyanna of this panel, and I think she's right.
Right. So, Sinead, I mean...
I'm cool with the internet.
Would you, Can I just ask you a few things about the internet?
Go ahead.
Because I feel, okay, born in the 70s, and I think all the rest of us were born in the 70s, is that right? And so we, you know, we have feelings about the internet. We remember having to stay home to get a phone call.
Like, I remember
the
that.
internet is a
Like,
big
you
deal
know,
for us, and we.
I'm not 50.
the
Like, I
before and
remember that too.
Okay, you remember that too. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but you, to me at least, seem like I feel like you were born and live inside the
You're a
internet.
digital native.
Yeah.
Sinead.
Do you?
Am I?
I don't know.
Well, yeah, like, I'm a global financial crisis graduate. Like, for me, there was never a lot of jobs. So I can't
Right.
even imagine a world where you could be a full-time film critic.
Okay.
Like, that blows my mind.
Good context.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't make me, like, yearn for another time, because I don't even know what that looks like.
So you see the internet as opportunity.
Like, I think of the literal Wild West.
Yeah.
When you're
The
like-
literal- right.
And I was really sad when the dissolved, but I think the idea that what's left is rubbish is not entirely accurate.
Okay,
well,
expand.
in my experience. I think criticism is just different now, and I think there's room for all of it. The reason I'm excited about criticism now is because the internet has changed what the right way to do criticism is, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing always. Like, of course, there's less jobs, and that's really upsetting. But I also think that it's allowed more voices to exist that perhaps wouldn't have existed had they gone the traditional route. And
Do you find that you... Mel talked a bit about authority just now.
yeah,
Do you find that you come up against a kind of wall of authority in
I
your running? Do
definitely
people
have.
say the way
Yeah.
you do this is wrong?
yeah, absolutely. But
Okay.
I haven't found it as much in my peers as I've found it people older than I am.
Really?
Yeah.
Do
I'm
you
a
find...
But that is basically kind of a generational thing that even existed when I started out in print. I
Yeah.
think that's pretty normal, and I
Yeah.
really agree with you about the fact that the internet is just a new medium that gives way for multifaceted voices and forms of expression.
And sometimes
So
it gets it wrong, and sometimes it gets it
in
right.
a way, there's no real need to be afraid of it or anything. I mean, it gives opportunities, and that's all challenging and exciting. The only thing that I more or less worry about is that, as you're saying, you grew up in a world where a profession as a film critic is not really an option. The idea that some professions are no longer professions anymore, but become hobbies, that's what's dangerous for me. And that's not so much from a critical perspective, or maybe it is from a cultural critical perspective, but it's also from a journalist perspective. We were talking about it this morning with the young filmmakers. Journalism always used to be kind of controlling the power. And who is controlling the power now when you don't have full-time journalists anymore? So that basically means that either you surrender to populism, or you end democracy by democratizing the media. And that is something that is having an enormous impact actually on our society and on our future, and how our jobs and all that are going to develop in future. So that's the stuff I feel that we have really to take into account. So that's also why I feel like specifically because I have the responsibility as being an editor, but also you should really sort of strive for is get the profession acknowledged as a profession.
I think I don't mean that I can't, like, if I don't know, I probably wouldn't be able to pay my rent, but if I wanted to write about film full time, perhaps I could do that. I think I'm more interested in the fact that the old guard of what a critic should be is changing, and more people are allowed to have a voice, because you can have a Twitter account, you can have a WordPress, these avenues are open to you. So perhaps I feel like a lot of time in criticism, old school criticism, the default experience was a white male heterosexual experience. And I think the internet has helped expand that, and perhaps we're having conversations about gender and queerness and race and class that maybe we wouldn't have had before. So I don't know if it's all, like, obviously a lot of people are losing their jobs, there are less platforms, but in another way there's a lot of exciting things that are bubbling up and being refined, and I don't know, I haven't lost hope.
No.
Maybe I'm Pollyanna and that's why.
Do you see that as being incompatible with the idea of professionalism?
No. I just think that there was this idea of the scholarly critic in the ivory tower that needed to have 5 years of film training and needed to be an academic in this way, and they had the authority to write about film, but sometimes there's a 19-year-old in Alaska with a WordPress that writes something amazing that and you think about a film in a way that you never have before, and that's valuable.
I feel as though there is a disjuncture, though, between the idea of making a living from writing about film, being a gatekeeper, like these are almost separate ideas now that aren't dependent on one another, and having like a good critical perspective. I feel as though this all used to be bound up in the one person, the professional film critic with the training, who was the gatekeeper, who had the authority, that kind of thing. But now we're seeing a very diffuse sort of online media sphere of people who draw their authority from different spheres, and like, are you a professional film critic if you are the 19-year-old blogger from Alaska? Do you think of yourself even as a professional film critic? What value is it to talk of professionalism? Because a lot of the anguish that I've seen recently has been economic anguish, you know, how are we to earn a living? You know, do we have the right to earn a living from this, or must we now just give up and acknowledge that maybe it is just a hobby? And maybe our challenge is to, if we want to do this kind of writing, we just have to capitulate to the needs of the market, which Kevin's so dispiritingly detailed. You know, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but it seems
You are
as
making
though,
sense, Mel.
like, are critics professionals anymore, or is the idea of professional? You really believe in professionalism?
Yes, because you could also go and Google whatever ailment you have, but we still need doctors.
Nice one.
And really, I mean, of course, and also we were talking earlier during Critics Campus, how do film critics leave the world a better place and all that, and then actually it was our colleague Jay Weisberg who said one of his favorite books about art history is Ways How to Look, or Learn How to Look, I can't quite remember. And that's actually what we film critics do. Sure. We engage in the debate of looking and perceiving and all that. So we have a function in the world, but I don't necessarily think that we need to have that old-fashioned kind of authoritarian voice. So it's a 19-year-old kid from Alaska can have a professional opinion. I'm happy to, but is it something that is repeatable, or is that where professionalism comes in? The same way we would expect it from lawyers and doctors and carpenters and any other person in the world. And why nowadays do we feel that anything having to do with arts or with academics is kind of a luxury? That is something that we should really question ourselves before we start to think about, well, maybe it's okay if it's no longer a profession. I could go and work at the supermarket, because that means that we start thinking about arts that way, and then we start about intelligentsia that way, and what's next? And that's something that's really bothering me, because, and maybe that is old-fashioned, but it's also based on a true and profound belief in what I've encountered while traveling and meeting up with lots of young people, actually, that we should make the world a place that's worthwhile to live, and we could learn from all the good things from internet, such as the hive mind and sharing and all those things, but they need to have kind of counterparts in the real world, because otherwise we won't be able to sustain the planet.
I feel like we've talked about money a little bit here, and that seems to pop up every time. But in this discussion about professionalism, money has an interesting role to play, I think, because some people think that if you have a job and are being paid to do something, that makes you a real version of that thing.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the idea raised in that New Yorker article I sent you guys, which I recommend to you, called A Critic's Manifesto. The idea that the critic's role is to kind of reveal the drama of how they came to this conclusion, or how they reached the judgment, and that their authority comes not from being an expert, but from deeply loving the subject, which seems to me connected to just having time. We all kind of know time is money. Like in the old school, you had time to do it because you were getting paid to do it. Now there are some people who have time to do it because they have a trust fund, or because they're 14 and their mum pays for their food. Could we think about professionalism as just being someone who spends a lot of time on criticism?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, well, amateur basically means someone who does it for love.
Is that right? Is that the Latin?
From the Latin.
Okay.
Yeah. But of course now amateurism has all sorts of negative connotations of incompetence and dilettantism.
Right.
But I really loved what Dana was saying about an idea of professionalism that's decoupled from the market because of the need to sort of stand against, on the barricades, because the market will colonise everything. I was suggesting earlier that it's colonising politics as well. I think that's really valuable in order to say that what we do has a value, but that its value is not necessarily a dollar value.
Yeah, except what do we do? Because the dissolve's gone. Could we pretend that this is one of those shows for 1 minute?
Everything.
Okay, we're on the Shark Tank, all right? Now, this is imaginary, obviously. What do you do? How do you save the dissolve?
Hey, by looking at them, because we're always talking about us, the critics, how we should solve all those financial problems, but those are the readers, like we're readers. Do you pay for what you read? I mean, how many of you have subscriptions to newspapers, magazines? How many of you do micropayments to articles, donations? I see like 2,
We've
3.
got some.
Okay, so basically the rest of you are stealing my food.
That's awesome.
No, really.
Yeah.
There is a reader's responsibility. I mean, and I'm probably coming from Europe, it's all a bit different because there is this tradition of cultural funding, and some magazines, the film can't use to get funding, we don't anymore, but still there is this responsibility in society that you actually sort of give funding to things you think are worth existing in society. And we're currently being sort of culturally colonized by this neoliberal American way of thinking, but maybe it's time that we kind of sort of fight back and think, hey, you're saying this is what we should be doing. Why should we surrender? We could do something else. We could actually pay for an online magazine, $60 a year to the dissolve. Imagine that if like 100,000 people would do that, they would have startup money to continue. And there are good examples. In the Netherlands, there is a web magazine called The Correspondent, and it's totally ad-free. It's online. It has some of the best long reads, like on politics and arts and culture.
And
they started,
itself?
but it's sustainable. They exist for 3 years now. You pay 60 euros, and they have like 100,000 people paying for that. And they have 3 articles a day that get uploaded, and they have really good investigative journalism and all that. So why don't we start paying for something? I mean, and I don't really mind paying for something that's worthwhile, and I don't even mind getting a stupid like 6th job at a supermarket to be able to do that, but it's our responsibility, and it's not just us having to solve like the economic crisis.
I feel like a lot of the discussions surrounding how could we have saved the Dissolve is based on the existing money-making platforms that exist. You know, what model should the Dissolve have done? You know, what did they do right and wrong? You know, should they have had subscriptions, paywalls, blah, blah, blah.
Should they have had more lists?
Well, my assumption was that they were looking for the movie equivalent of the Pitchfork, what Pitchfork is to music, which the way I describe it is like the music you should care about tomorrow. You know, it's like just cooler than cool, bleeding edge type stuff. And you know, I think there's a business model around that because Pitchfork, they organize events, they do all sorts of merchandising or marketing around that. So it's a business model for them. I don't know if you can replicate that in a movie context. You know, what does it mean to be marketing and promoting the movies you should care about tomorrow? That's actually kind of the thing that film festivals do. But then like, how do you turn that into like a money-making enterprise?
I get it. I got an idea. You put it inside Netflix.
But Netflix is now into TV.
Problem
I mean, they're into
solved.
long-form TV content.
Right, sorry.
Netflix is moving away from movies.
Yeah.
You know, because movies are just sort of like not as cost-effective. You know, TV shows, it's just like you film the same location, same people, and then you stretch it out for like 20 hours of viewing. So it's a very cost-effective model.
Sorry, Kevin. How did you view the audience for Fandor? Did you see them as kind of insiders, or was part of your role to try to kind of suck people over? And,
I mean, the capitalist model is to expand, you know.
Yeah.
So I was definitely looking to see if it was like, I think there were like 3 words that just kept getting tossed around. No, 2 words: smart and accessible. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. These are smart movies. These are movies that are, you know, art cinema as an aspirational lifestyle kind of thing, which is like, you know,
right.
like,
good audience to sell.
it makes your lives better to watch these movies, people. So, so yeah, there's a little bit of that. But then it was just like, but then at the same time, how do you make it accessible enough? There's a difference between having things that look smart and feel smart, but aren't too smart as to be a little intimidating and threatening. And that was like the problem I ran into with my boss at times. He was like, yeah, okay, I get it that, you know, you've got great people writing for you, but when I read Fandor, I feel dumb. Like, and I just don't want to feel dumb. So it's this weird balancing act between, okay, you know, how do you take Jean-Luc Godard? How do you take Pedro Costa or Api Chapong, Zethacool? These are like my favorite filmmakers. And how do you speak about them in a way that isn't threatening and makes people appreciate them?
And also which isn't condescending. It's like, it's good for you, eat your veggies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there's a lot of criticism that actively seeks to alienate their audience and be like, well, this is what this thing is.
Or it's like the writer trying to prove how smart they are.
Yeah, and it's
by
like,
writing about it.
that is so boring. You should never assume that your writing is more important than the movie that you've just seen.
So how can we, I want to get away from the word monetize because it's terrible and it's not a real word, but also because...
And is it spelled with an S or a Z?
I would spell it with an S because I'm Australian.
Yep.
But
Are we doing a spelling test?
Sorry.
It's like,
Spelling bee.
maybe
New word, that's all, new word.
but I think that maybe we need to find some way of that means sustainability in writing without tying it to money. You know, how can we create something that's sustainable? I mean, I had actually heard of that Dutch magazine. I think it was discussed in the fallout surrounding the Dissolve. There's also an Australian women's magazine that has no ads, and it's sold at the supermarket like any other magazine. But they just decided, no, we're not going to have ads in our magazine. Our magazine is a product that you buy at the supermarket because you want the things that are in the magazine. And I think that's a really exciting and challenging way of looking at writing as something that people want, but detaching it from all the logics that it's been trapped with so far. So I don't know what the challenge, how to meet that challenge, but I'm excited by, you know, I thought I would be so negative coming into this panel, but it does excite me, the idea that we can be sustainable and that film writing, there's a place for it that has a cultural value that's not necessarily the same as an economic value.
Actually, I'm pretty hopeful because there's 2 options. Either the world really goes down the next 5 years, or we really have to change something. And that really changing something, that's also already happening in lots of places where people are trying to live in different ways, in more kind of future-proof communities in Europe, in many countries, as a result of the economic crisis. People are already talking about forms of, I don't know the English term for that, but a basic income. So basically what the government would do is give everybody like the 1,000 euros a month to live on, and you could work and earn a bit more. And actually that's cheaper than everything they're doing now with tax and refund and all that. And if you could think of a world economics that's just different from what we're used to now, but it's not impossible. Also, it doesn't exclude growth in the way we're still like to think about ourselves. Maybe in those kind of societies, actually, people could devote time to writing and thinking, and maybe 2 days a week, whatever, grow their own veggies, and have different kind of contributions to society. And I think a lot of places in Greece where young people are trying to sort of survive the crisis, you can actually see that it's working. So I think because we all see that the current system is not working. It's not working for the film industry because there's a whole kind of segments of the film industry that simply collapsed and has been taken over by television, which is also very exciting in a way. But it's kind of, there's so much going on, but it's definitely not gonna stay the same it was. So I'm pretty hopeful, actually. The only thing I'm really waiting for is because I'm not even born in, I was born in the 60s.
Oh, sorry.
So,
great decade.
these, oh yes, but because I was
might be
born in
coming
it.
back.
But anyway, it might come back. Yeah, I may sound a bit hippy-dippy, but I mean, it's also like, I'm waiting for these younger generations to really get in sync with their own times and teach me and kind of find the clues.
I think the problem is a lot of young writers are told that their writing isn't as good as the writing that was being done 10 or 20 years ago, and that it doesn't hold as much weight. And if it doesn't subscribe to a certain way that writing is supposed to be, then it means nothing. So it's like, it's hard because it's a model that's like, people are mourning the death of something, and there's a generation that's mourning a death of something that they never really experienced, and living up to an ideal that they just can't, because it doesn't.
But that's kind of, this is kind of really the sort of the break line where a younger generation can invite new forms of criticism, new ways of writing that don't have to live up to the expectations of the past, because you can never. I mean, it's impossible. It's impossible to catch up with the film history of the 20th century. It is impossible for me. So you have to find new ways to handle all that. And maybe if you don't try to surrender to my criteria, maybe you could come up with something new. But that kind of deserves a bit of self-confidence and thinking, okay, F it, I'm just going for it.
Speaking of going for it, can we have an audience question or two? I really put you on the spot there, didn't I? Josh! No,
David.
sorry, but that man that looks like Josh, thank you.
I can be Josh if you want me to. I have a question just generally about crowdfunding models, because it seems like even as most people don't seem to be jumping onto subscriptions, crowdfunding does tend to work for a lot of publications. Why is that?
Why does it work?
Yeah, and is it a sustainable model?
It works because it's super old-fashioned. It used to be called subscriptions.
I don't think it's quite the same as subscriptions. I think it's more like passing around the hat.
Yeah.
You know, when someone was in a tight spot, everyone would just chip in a little bit of money and help them over. You know, like rent parties during the Depression, everyone would have a party and pay a certain amount of money, and that way the host would pay their rent for that month.
I reckon it's also about audiences and the fact that on the internet you can find the audience.
It's true, but I feel very dispirited about popularity because I don't see that I have the ability to go viral, to harness popular opinion, and I think that perhaps is a replacement currency. So if you can, I just had this nightmare. What if I did a crowdfunding campaign and no one donated? Like, that's just like my fear. So I feel like you've got to have the ability to rally people behind you in order to make it work, and maybe not everyone has that ability. Maybe some ideas are catchy and others just aren't. Others are hard to get your head around, and maybe those would be less successful in terms of crowdfunding. And also what happens in terms of long term, you know, maybe your friends and your supporters get tired of having to chip in every time you do something, and they feel like, are they just holding you up? You know, but of course then there's this real neoliberal idea of rugged individualism. You ought to be able to survive on your own resources, and if you can't, then you're a failed person, which I think is false. But yeah, I just don't know about crowdfunding. What do you guys reckon?
I think you should team up. You shouldn't be forced to do it as an individual, because that would basically mean that you should sort of go out and beg to be able to whatever, be a professional in any form. But we're so used to everything expanding and growth and all that. But what if we just did it with a group of 10 people and sort of were able to create a small publication that is sustainable? It might be a new way of thinking about the knots in the network and they have far more kind of ways out than in the old times when people just were really living and working in their closed community, because we have the World Wide Web. But it doesn't necessarily have to be this idea that bigger is better. And I think if you work with a smaller group of people and you think and have like short-term perspectives, it could work, it might work. There's also experiments in insurance in European countries where people just, I was interested to hear about this, even though it was from the Depression, but where people sort of donate 100 euros a month in case one of the 10 or 12 people will get unemployed or sick or anything. So they sort of build up their own insurance. So there's different ways of thinking about it. And I agree totally with you that not everybody should be forced to be an entrepreneur, but at least we can think and read about it and find the people with the kind of more economical skills who can perform these.
Yeah, maybe everyone should find their roles. You know how a lot of startups tend to fail because they're run by editors and writers and no one's on the business side of things?
We should all make friends with someone who knows how to sell ads.
Or
I'm just suggesting
or
that.
who has that personality, that entrepreneurial personality,
Yes.
because we should just think no one person, like you say, should.
Or think
be.
of other ways to earn a living. Why not open a bar and work there 1 day a week with 12 other people, and by that be able to earn some kind of a basic income and spend 6 days doing whatever you like? I mean, there's really different ways, and we really should change our mentality in that.
Let's have one more question. Such an amazing audience. Oh no, Brodie. Sorry.
I wanted to know what the publications. Do I need that? What are the places that you think are doing good criticism? Like, what are the publications you follow on Facebook
Ooh, let's start on that
that you
end.
actively read?
Let's start with the internet.
That's my nickname. Grantland, which I know some people hate, but I really like. The Atlantic and Vulture.
New York Magazine, Vulture.
Yep.
Yep.
Which is part of New York Magazine, yeah,
Right.
right. Fandor. Australia has this great new startup website, 4.3.
What is it, Kevin?
4.3, yeah.
It's an aspect ratio.
Yeah, 43film.com. Yeah, I mean, actually, it's all catch as you can. Like, I don't know where the next great article is going to come from, and so like these days, I find myself paying more attention to my Twitter feed and just seeing what gets buzz on that. So
I agree. I like everything that you guys have so far mentioned. I really love Jacobin magazine, which is a very left-wing publication that has an explicitly political form of criticism that I really enjoy. I also like the Onion AV Club. You know, they've been doing it for so long, and they cover such a broad range of stuff and still do it quite well, I think.
I wish you all could read like Dutch. Of course, you could do my writing, but also, I mean, somehow that there would be more exchange between German and French and Spanish writers, because there's so much more exciting things going on. So maybe just learn a second language.
Well, that's a good suggestion. Also, I'm really happy that everything that was mentioned just then was online. So the future is bright. Is that right?
Oh, well, I
honestly
forgot
don't
to mention Film Fatale is a great Melbourne film
Prince
scene.
scene. Yeah, true. We've run out of time, and it feels like we just got. I mean, it was really interesting, and I want to thank everyone so much for jumping in and having a real discussion. If you guys want to continue debating this, go on the hashtag. Is that the correct terminology?
I think so.
Go on the hashtag MIFF 2015 TP, and can everyone just help me thank all our speakers today?
Thank you.